The death of one of England's best-known kings took place amid an atmosphere of court intrigue and religious ferment that had characterized the last 20 years of his reign. Henry's final battle was against disease and geriatric decay, and this had a significant impact on how he ruled in his final years. Henry VIII died on the 28th of January 1547 at Whitehall Palace in London. Technically, he died of natural causes. However, he suffered from severe obesity, an open ulcerated leg. And within the last 11 years, he suffered from massive head trauma from his infamous final jousting accident. There is a high probability that the king suffered from type 2 diabetes and other obesity-related diseases. Henry's final months were filled with paranoia, manipulation, and tyranny. When he ascended the throne at the age of 17, Henry was welcomed as a virtuous prince. However, after going through 6 wives and executing about 72,000 people during his reign, he gained his place as the most notorious monarch to have ever sat on the throne. Much of what Henry accomplished in his life remains overshadowed by the executions and the cruelty. Henry's decline in health was not rapid. This had its groundings 11 years before his death. Henry suffered his last infamous jousting accident in January 1536. He was thrown from his horse with a lance blow, the horse itself fell on him, and he was unconscious probably for several hours. The severity of the jousting accident was that many people in his inner circle believed the king would never recover and would die soon. However, he was able to recover. But it wasn't a full recovery. Henry suffered massive head trauma. Today, medical professionals believe this changed his personality and drove him to the tyranny that he is often associated with. In addition to the head injury, Henry also suffered leg injuries. This would lead to the formation of open ulcers forming for the rest of his life. Over the next 10 years, Henry would survive more than one occasion where the infection in his legs risked his life. The apparent injuries from the jousting accident were probably not the most important factor that caused his death. The once active and exercise-loving king could no longer indulge in his favorite pastimes. The long 6-hour hunts, tennis games, and of course, the jousts became a thing of the past. However, Henry's enormous appetite didn't moderate in line with his reduced activity. As a result, his waistline increased. At the time of his death, it was estimated that the king probably weighed over 25 stones. Due to his heavy diet and obesity, Henry likely suffered from untreated type 2 diabetes. However, this cannot be proven. After Henry's victory at the Siege of Boulogne, his health deteriorated keenly. The weight seemed to pile on quicker. As a result, his activity level decreased. Henry's paranoia increased as he battled against the 2 warring religious factions on either side of his council. He had the traditionalists in one corner, with Bishop Stephen Gardiner as the head. On the opposing side, the reformers. Henry came to believe that everyone was out to get him. His paranoia increased as he played both parties off against each other with increasingly regular occurrences. Henry was no longer the powerful figure that he once was. For those in his inner circle, the myth of his invincibility was all but dispelled. Various measures were introduced over time to control the king's poor health. Wheelchairs were constructed to move Henry around his palaces. Elevators were installed so that Henry could secretly go to the upper floors. Those who saw him every day knew he was a broken man, a shadow of himself. However, a little over a year before his death, on Christmas Eve 1545, Henry visited the Parliament and delivered a speech. It was Henry at his finest. A throwback to the charismatic prince of his youth. It was a bombastic display that combined a mixture of chastisement, humility, and praise for both his audience and the general population. He urged the country to unite in good Christian charity. The last full year of Henry VIII's life had momentous high spot. It was clear that after the king's death, more significant religious reforms would take place. In mid-December, Henry suffered a short illness believed to have been linked to the condition of his legs. However, he rallied quickly. Clearly, Henry knew that his end was fast approaching, and he needed to make arrangements for after his death. He decided to send the Queen and his daughters away to Greenwich for Christmas. The court that remained at Whitehall consisted of just the Privy Council and his very closest gentlemen of the chamber. The final chapter in Henry VIII's extraordinary life was about to play out. The day after Christmas 1546, Henry VIII called for his will. When Sir Anthony Denny read the document aloud, Henry stated that it was not the document in question. He insisted there was another will written in the hand of the Lord Chancellor. The correct copy was located and was read out. The contents of Henry VIII's will have always been open to speculation. By this point in his life, he had ceased to sign documents. Instead, a stamped version of his signature was used to authorize all manner of documents from the mundane through to execution warrants. Henry decided he was going to make some corrections to the document as it stood. He removed Stephen Gardiner from the list of executors and counsellors who would advise his son. After this point, it was merely a matter of time. Everyone knew that Henry was dying. His council quietly and imperceptibly began to prepare for the transfer of power. No one other than the Privy Council had access to Henry VIII's chambers. Not even his wife or his daughters, who were all desperate for the news. At the beginning of January, there were rumors in the court that the king was already dead. However, these rumors were silenced when Henry received both the imperial and French ambassadors on the 16th of January. Henry had become paranoid that Howard was attempting to seize the throne from his son, Edward, after his death. He became Henry VIII's final victim. On the 27th of January, royal assent was given to the attainder Duke of Norfolk. However, by this point, Henry VIII was on his final decline. Finally, Sir Anthony Denny told the king that he was dying and that he should prepare his soul for his final journey. When asked who should he send for, Henry declared that it should be Cranmer, but would get some sleep before making his final decision. By the time Cameron was summoned and reached Henry's bedside, the king could no longer speak. When asked if he died in Christ, Cranmer confirmed that the king had squeezed his hand. Henry VIII died quietly in the early hours of Friday, the 28th of January 1547. What a pitiful end for a once powerful figure. The king's death wasn't publicly announced for 3 days. During that time, all of his meals were brought into the chambers to great fanfare. Meanwhile, the dead king's body began to rot. Edward Seymour, Lord Hertford, was busy securing the body of the new king, Edward VI. Within a matter of days, the provisions in Henry VIII's will were ignored. As opposed to a council of equals to manage the regency of the 9-year-old Edward, Lord Hertford was made the Lord Protector. The plans that Henry had for a grand tomb came to nothing. None of his 3 children bothered to finish the project when they came to the throne. Henry remained in his unmarked grave next to Jane Seymour in St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. Many feel aggrieved that Henry had a peaceful death, warm in bed after inflicting so much suffering to others. When told by Denny that he was likely to die, Henry said he believed that Christ in all his mercy would pardon me all my sins, though they were greater than can be. On this matter, Henry VIII was undoubtedly correct, his sins were greater than can be.